Little bit of background about me. I have been with the Coaching Association of Canada now for 10 years. I've worked with Canada Snowboard for that entire time. I've been lucky enough to work with Canada Snowboard. Great group of people there. Met a lot of great coaches through the years, and was really excited to get the opportunity to share some ideas with you tonight. We've looked at sharing a sort of high range of ideas, hoping that there'll be some interaction. This will be as long and as interactive as you guys make it. So in my other hat, I'm also a learning facilitator, both in Multisport World and for Rugby Canada, mentor with Alpine Canada, and do some coach mentoring as well. So you can never get the learning facilitator out of me completely. So while we're not in a room together, I hopefully still will have some interactive stuff. My background is as a multi-sport athlete and coach. I've coached a number of sports over the years. I come from a teaching background as well, taught for 10 years, coaching the whole time, both on snow. Don't hold it against me. I wear 2 boards, not 1. Get that out in the open right off the top. But that's my winter gig. Summers I still actively coach rugby. I've coached a number of team sports and individual sports over the years, so hopefully we can move through this together tonight and hopefully find it engaging. Just a reminder to please mute all mics if you can. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we're working through this tonight, the first thing I just wanted to share was a few questions for you to consider as we're discussing. So again, I'll share a bit of information, but if you can keep these 3 questions sort of front of mind, really why a multi-sport approach? There's been a lot of noise and a lot of talk about early specialization and the need to look at multi-sport over the last little while. We'll look at a few examples there and share some of that information. I'm not going to go too in-depth in that area. There's plenty of resources I can point you to if you want to dig deeper in there, but we'll share a little bit of information there. So why are we looking at this multi-sport approach? Second big question is, why do we need play? What's the importance of play? How does that fit in when we're looking at training and developing athletes and potentially working through a non-snowboarding environment? How is play going to come into both the non-snowboarding environment and when we're on snow? And then finally, if we can put it all together and do some reflecting at the end, what does that mean in terms of quality coaching? So how can we take these 2 pieces, insert that or marry that with our technical knowledge about the sport, whether you're a speed coach, style coach, how do we marry that technical knowledge and that we bring in that expertise with this sort of ideas around multi-sport and the idea of incorporating play? So very quickly, with CAC, our mission is to enhance the experience of all Canadian athletes through quality coaching. So you're going to see some things tonight around coaching kids. You're going to see some stuff around coaching adolescents. And I'm going to say up front that I would strongly support the messaging you're hearing tonight and the ideas we're going to talk about and share, whether you're coaching a 4 or 5, 6-year-old through to teenage years and right into adulthood. I think the concepts and the ideas that we're discussing here really are applicable across all contexts throughout long-term athlete development. So briefly, the overview of what we're going to do and the outcomes, hopefully, that you'll get from it is I'll share a little bit of information on early specialization and the multi-sport approach and what that means from an athlete development perspective, from an injury prevention perspective, and from a burnout perspective, which is arguably the most important cross sport, and we'll talk about that a little later. Hopefully we're going to have a chance to get you to all reflect on your current practice, and by that I mean your current practice as a coach. We'll have a chance to share some of our strategies and some of the things we're already doing, ask some questions of each other. Certainly learned over my years that the expertise that is on this webinar, we all bring a ton to the table, and it's really beneficial to learn from each other. So it won't be one-way traffic coming from me. And then finally, at the end, we'll just share a little bit and discuss some of those best strategies and some things that we can potentially implement in our own programs and our own philosophies or coaching moving forward. So I'm going to start with a quick video here. Bear with me on the technology. If it doesn't directly work from the link, I will sort it out, but we're just going to take a couple minutes here to watch a video.
smile on my face when I hear that, because the play is just essential to what I think all children should have the opportunity to do. The word play, I think, has lost its meaning, because play belongs to kids, and they are very good at playing. In defense of all parents and the choices they make, they're trying to do what they feel is for their child. They're trying to make that best decision, but we tend to do what we feel is right as adults rather than what is right for the children. And so as a result, we have practice rather than play. When I grew up, play was about playing on the playground. You went out, you formed your own teams, and you played whatever sport was in season, whether it was volleyball or basketball or football, or in my case, hockey. And I believe right now we do still have play in our country and in our community, but it has often become more of a playground atmosphere where it's become a proving ground rather than just a playground.
America was first captivated by the concept of specialization when they were introduced to a 2-year-old golf prodigy named Tiger Woods. Specialization is the development of specific single sport skills at a young age in order to optimize talent and potential for advancement. But by focusing on less, we've actually created a culture of more. More stress, more injuries, more burnout. Kids are no longer kids. They are capital.
Once you start to specialize, then everything becomes very serious, and you start to look at performance indicators. You start to look at games won versus games lost. You start to look at goals for and goals against. You start taking statistics, and then you start focusing on the outcome rather than the process. If they're playing specialized soccer at 6 and they do it for 10 years, by the time they're 16, it has felt like a job, and it has felt like work.
And all of this work comes with a cost. Tommy John surgery at 12, ACL reconstruction at 13. Careers are ending before they even are given the chance to begin. We no longer have seasons. We have year-long cycles of always. We have no breaks, no more learning of new skills, no more fun, and a lot more pressure. But because there are no gold medals won on a blacktop and no shoe deals signed on cracked concrete, these harsh truths are ignored. What we need is more stories of athletes, not just basketball players or football players or golfers. Athletes. Athletes who played, athletes who play. Allen Iverson didn't become fearless in a gym. Jimmy Graham didn't learn to dunk with a football. Steve Nash first passed the ball with his feet. And Kobe Bryant didn't master his footwork on the hardwood.
But we have to be the ambassadors of that. And, the more stories we can tell, and the more professional and semi-professional and college athletes that can come out and be a part of the sort of multi-skill, multi-sport environment, I think the greater that message will be.
We no longer play to play. We play to win. We play for what's next, the next LeBron, the next shoe deal, making the next team, making the best team. Without knowing it, we are turning out the lights on the next generation of athletes, of people.
Sorry, so that video was actually produced by a Canadian, although it had obviously an American feel to it, using he was from Vancouver. He was studying in the States at the time. But it's just an idea of, again, as I said earlier, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of noise, a lot of media surrounding early specialization and the idea of play and deliberate play, in fact, as opposed to what we're all creating or have created in terms of practice, and this idea of early specialization, single sport skill, maximizing maximizing the athlete. And as that sort of 4-minute little vignette sort of I hopefully gave you a little purview to, we're gonna tackle some of those issues around whether it's sports skill, whether it's injury, whether it's burnout, and some of the other comments that were made that you heard in that video. So in terms of multi-sport approach then, what exactly does that mean? So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is think about your own program, your own reality. Again, whether you're coaching 8, 10, 12-year-old riders programs, if you're coaching 12 to 14 to 16-year-old developing athletes getting into 14 to 16 to 18 plus and starting to hit competitive riding, whether it's NORAM, whether it's moving into the sort of performance level and above. I want you just to think about in terms of your athletes, and just try to prepare because we're going to talk about this a little later, but in terms of your athletes, do they participate in sports other than snowboard? So of that group, do you have any athletes that you think are going down this path, or are they actually doing other things? And the second thing I want you to think about and be prepared to share a little bit later is how much play do you incorporate into your training environment? We know time is of the essence as coaches. We all wish we had more time with our athletes. We know time is limited because of money. Time is limited because of life outside of sport. Time is limited because athletes can only train for so many hours. We need rest and recovery. But having said all that, how much play do you purposefully incorporate into your current training environment? So those are two questions I want you to think about in the back of your head. And again, we're going to have a conversation about it in a little while here. Just a couple of sort of infographics below. You may or may not have seen them before. The one on the bottom left is a little infographic about the Chicago Bears of their starters. So these were their starters in 2014. For those who don't know football, there are 21 people here as 22 starters. They covered off 8 different sports growing up and when they're developing into NFL football players. The info on the right was stolen from the Ohio State board, a whiteboard, a couple of years back when they won a national championship. It's certainly made the rounds on social. I'm sure you may or may not have seen it before. But of the Ohio State recruits on that national championship team, you can see 42 of them were multi-sport athletes through high school. Only 5 specialized in football. So again, starting to let in some credence and let in some numbers. Although these are anecdotal, we'll look at some sort of research-based ones later. But starting to give that idea that maybe there's something to this idea around multi-sport training. So moving from the sort of anecdotal US stuff, looking around the world, there's again dozens and dozens of references to this idea around multi-sport coaching. I'm not going to read what's on the screen, I'll just speak to it. I know the webinar is being recorded, and certainly the PowerPoint will be made available to everyone who was on it after the fact, so I certainly will not bore you with reading a PowerPoint slide. However, to paraphrase this, Tony Strudwick was the performance coach, so strength and conditioning, fitness for Manchester United, arguably one of the most successful soccer teams in Europe for a number of years. You can see there he won 13 titles during his time there. He is a huge believer in the idea of multi-sport background for the reasons you can see there: lowering injury rates, more adaptable to the demands of elite play. I think the quote at the bottom is pretty huge from a sport development perspective and an athlete development perspective. The idea there that what sets people apart at the highest level is really thanks to a range of motor skills beyond what is typically expected in a given sport. So if we apply that to riding, whether you're racing, whether you're a style rider, whether you're in the pipe, we all know, and we can all talk, I'm sure you guys can teach me more than I know about edge control, about pressure control, about carving, etc. But we all spend an awful lot of time in sport, and particularly in snowboarding, being out of balance and having to make decisions, split-second decisions to recover, use these motor skills, use our motor memory. Snow condition changes, ruts, human error, right? We spend a lot of time out of balance and usually moving pretty quickly and often pretty high up over some pretty big gaps. So having this sort of stockpile within your muscle memory, within your mental arsenal as well, to be able to make these quick split-second decisions that really may or may not have been learned while riding. I think if we learn those things riding, it's going to be a pretty painful lesson because we're going to be falling an awful lot, versus if you start to learn body awareness and kinesthetic awareness through, other sports where potentially you're not over top of a 60-foot gap, for example, right? These are ways we can then translate them sport to sport. So again, questions for you to consider then. We've heard, a lot of the research, as we know with most sports, a lot of the research is team sport based, but you will notice in that video there's a lot of talk of golf. If you noticed on the Chicago Bears thing, there was actually tennis in there, which is interesting, and it was not the quarterback. So that's an interesting piece in there, that there is individual stuff as well. But what does this multi-sport approach mean for you as a snowboard coach? So we're in a different environment in snowboard. We're in an alpine environment. We've got different realities to deal with than a swimmer or a gymnast or a team sport, field sport, court sport type coach. So what does that mean in snowboarding, right? We have limited time on snow. Some are luckier than others, and they're at a point in their career where they're flying around the world with athletes and chasing the snow. But we're really limited on snow space, on hill space, time on snow. So how does this multi-sport approach mean then? What are athletes doing outside of that time on snow, beyond what they need in terms of strength and conditioning, beyond what they need in terms of rest and recovery for your snowboarding program? How are they developing those athletic abilities and developing, again, that kinesthetic awareness, that muscle memory off snow and outside of the snowboarding world? Another question there to think about, and I'm going to open it up here in a second, is how can you encourage that as a coach? We often see athletes who are in love with their sport, and all they want to do is ride, or all they want to do is play hockey. I have a 9-year-old nephew now, and if you see anything other than hockey, he goes sideways. But how can you as a coach start to encourage this idea of multi-sport participation? And again, we're talking all the way through to at least late teens, right? We're not talking about just the 5, 6, 7-year-olds at this point. So what are some things you can do to encourage that, both to your athletes, to your parents? We often, I know in my coaching, I often hear from parents about how much they're investing in their kid in a certain sport, and why I'm at the bottom of the hill doing warm-ups with a soccer ball or other things versus just running gates all day. And then the third question there is, what about multiple discipline riding within snowboarding? And so by that, obviously, I know you guys understand that. Certainly not suggesting by the photos on this slide here that we should have our high-level race board riders hucking huge airs and vice versa. But at what point do you feel it's appropriate to start specializing in terms of discipline within a snowboard environment? So if you can think about those 3 questions and think about what we've seen so far, is there anybody that, and I'll just ask you to maybe raise your hand in the box if anyone has anything to share here, or anything that they've done, or any sort of initial thoughts around how does this multi-sport thing fit with us in a snowboard environment? I do know a few of you, and the teacher in me will start picking on those I know if I have radio silence the whole time. You know who you are. Nothing? Okay, well, we'll move on. Oh, Cam, is there a question there? Yep, hang on. No, that's just may lose you. Okay, all good, Cam. We see that you may have to sign off because of wireless issues. That's all good. Just jump back on if you can, or when you can. So if there are no questions or ideas to share at this point, I would just challenge you or ask you to think about those questions, right? So as we're working through, again, you're going to see a lot of team sport examples. You're going to see some individual sport examples. But really try to bring this back to your reality, your riders, your parents, to see what ways you can use this in order to increase the athletic abilities of your riders. So another example of the numbers from multisport. U.S. Olympic Committee did a survey finished it in 2014 of all of their Olympians that they had data on, going back a number of games. And it's pretty, pretty self-explanatory, I think, when you look at these numbers, that not until athletes were over the ages of 18 did anyone jump under the two sports. There's often parents and athletes who talk about, well, I need to train this, I need to train this, I need to train this. This is what I need. The Tiger Woods example, the Lindsey Vonn example from alpine ski. Skiing since she was 4 and driving all over the world for training. Obviously, two examples that have in their later life had huge injury issues and really have sort of potentially peaked too soon or have not had the success they potentially could have had with a multisport. But when you look at all the U.S. Olympic athletes who obviously are quite successful on the world stage, it's pretty telling there that right through till 18 you've got, and in fact all the way to 14 it's pretty close to 3 or more. And then maybe tails off between 15 to 18 where there is that sort of beginning to specialize need comes up. Of course, caveat, gymnastics, maybe figure skating. There are a couple sports that are early specialization, but we don't necessarily fit into that, we being snowboard coaches. So again, just a little bit of an idea of the numbers and a study from the States. I'm sure you've seen it and heard it before. Throw this out there just again, if you're having conversations with whether it's parents, athletes, whoever, to try to have conversations around this need for multisport. You start to see all these names, who all at one point or another were pretty close to the top of their sport. And you look at what they did growing up, and many of them were playing, and in fact playing more often in other sports. I guess with the current one right down the bottom, there's Jordan Spieth in golf, taking up golf quite late in life, seriously taking it up. Took it up as a young team, but played everything through till post 18, 19, 20, and suddenly started being a world beater still in his early and mid-20s. So you can see that this idea of training athletes, and I think it was really well said at the end of that video, we are coaching people who hopefully we can turn into or help them develop into strong, powerful, happy athletes who happen to be riding, right? We hear a lot of, I coach snowboard, I coach alpine, I coach rugby. I don't actually coach rugby, I coach people who happen to be playing rugby. And I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind, that sort of big picture, these are the types of things that can help us to develop these athletes, and eventually they can, again, go out and be world beaters. So why? We've heard of, yeah, we should all do multisport. Why should we do it? Just grabbed a few sort of tidbits here of information around, this has really been gathered into an article. John O'Sullivan runs a project called Changing the Game Project. He's out of the States, does a lot of work in Canada with us as well. And this just sort of gives a summary around, why multisport? What is the benefit of me going and swimming? What does that have to do with snowboarding? What is the benefit of me speed skating? How's that applicable? What are the benefits of me, even heaven forbid, skiing? What's this going to do for me as a snowboarder? And the reality really is just summarized there. The overall ability, again, increases motor and athletic development, lengthens playing careers, which obviously the longer you're playing at the top of your game, the more chance you have of winning. This transferability of sports skills to other sports is massive. We've seen it over and over again, that again, learning things like body position, things like kinesthetic awareness, what your body's doing when it's off axis, all these things that are completely applicable to snowboarding can be learned in other sports. And the big pieces down the bottom there: motivation, ownership of the experience, and confidence. We know through human development research that people who are A, having fun, B, trying a variety of things, C, not, as their Oregon coach said in that video, not feeling like it's a job at 14 years old, 15 years old, that really does increase motivation and allows you to take more risks and to really push yourself and push the envelope, which obviously in all sports is important, certainly is front and center of snowboarding. Number 2 is a big one. Creativity is huge. Obviously in the style side of snowboarding, it's massive. I would argue it's also pretty important in the race side of things. Whether you're looking at line, risk, reward, snowboard, cross, creative thinking. We know that decision-based training is massive, and we're making, our brain synapses are firing, and we're making hundreds of decisions in split seconds when we're playing sport. So being able to understand, as you see their decision-making, pattern recognition, things you've seen in other areas that you can now apply back when you're riding. These are things that, again, coaches of high-level teams are looking for this kind of athlete. And again, let's really stress that word athlete. Quickly on the last one there, or third of five, the American Medical Society looked at 88% of college athletes played multi-sport. That's a pretty high percentage. You're not seeing people specializing in alpine or football or baseball going into college or university. They're really multi-sport athletes who are garnering, again, scholarships and education and other life benefits. Continuing on, 10,000 hours has been bantered around for a number of years now, and it's been now quite clearly proven that it's not a rule. While it was a well-written and entertaining book by Mr. Gladwell, and certainly some people it works for, when looking at the actual scientific literature about it, it's far less than 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So again, you see there, there's 2 team sports and then individual sport, where they're 4, 4, and 6. So it's far less than that 10,000. Having said that, if you look at the second thing on professional ice hockey, 10,000 hours is a pretty good guide as a loose number in terms of hours involved in sports pre-age 20. So again, any kind of athletic endeavors, can be organized sport, can be hiking, can be anything where you are developing those athletic abilities. The 10,000 hours actually starts to even out and sound like a number that's a little closer. So while it's saying it's not a rule, it's actually not a bad number. But again, it's not 10,000 hours of riding. It's not 10,000 hours on snow. It's 10,000 hours developing those skills and those athletic abilities we need to be strong riders. So looking at, again, only 3,000 of those hours for the pro players were based in hockey. And of that, only 450 hours under age 12. So this idea of, one sport sooner, faster, it just doesn't make any sense. And the numbers are now coming out to back it up. So back to asking yourselves some questions. I want you to think about that. Think about the injury stuff. Think about what you do in your daily practice as a coach. So start with that first question there. Do you currently track the participation of your athletes elsewhere for prevention and recovery of injury? So while we are certainly strongly suggesting that multi-sport has a definite correlated benefit to developing athletic riders, as a coach, you also have an onus to ensure that your riders are safe, and that means safe from injury, it means safe mentally. So while it's one thing to preach that you should be promoting a multi-sport situation, you also as a coach need to know what your riders are doing. So tracking what they're doing is key. Getting some recording and reporting around that so that you know when you may or may not have to ease off your training session because they've had a heavy session somewhere else, or that they've got a tournament in another sport or something else going on. Well, you don't want to discredit that. You do need to take that into consideration when you're developing your annual training plans for your sport. Second piece is, how do you track injuries, particularly concussion, that athletes sustained outside of your training environment? So there, unfortunately, are numerous examples of athletes who carry injuries from one environment to another, whether it's a sport environment or not. Certainly we know with concussion, you do not need to be playing sports to get a concussion. Many kids get concussions, whether you're tobogganing, whether you're wrestling with your brother or sister, etc. So what protocols, what communications do you have in place with your parents and with your athletes to ensure that when an injury is sustained, you're being made aware of it? The reason concussion is in there, it's not to say that it's more or less important. Obviously, traumatic brain injury is extremely important. The reason we highlight it here is that you can't see it. So it's pretty obvious if an athlete blows their knee out, they're at the very least going to be limping slightly. I'm being facetious, but certainly with a concussion and a traumatic brain injury, you may or may not see any visible symptoms. Therefore, if you didn't witness the event, if you weren't there when things took place, you may not know. So again, food for thought as a coach in terms of what does this mean for me. You do have still that duty of care, so reporting and recording is important. Third one there, strength and conditioning. What's going on outside your environment? What are they doing on a daily basis? You know, if they're a younger athlete, again, is it multi-sport? If they're a slightly older athlete, getting the teen years and above, are they, you know, what are they doing for a job? How much S&C or conditioning are they getting from what they're doing? Are they an outdoor education instructor that's walking 20K a day, 30K a day on top of the training loads that you're doing? Are they coaching in their spare time, or are they a CASI instructor in their spare time because they need to make some money? So are they riding way more hours than you've got in your annual plan? You know, these kinds of things, are they gym rats that just like to go to the gym? Are they doing crazy work outside of the programming that you've got them doing? Again, reason you need to know those things is looking at loading and looking at injury prevention, injury recovery through overuse, right? We know prevention recovery is key. So what kind of tracking are you doing in terms of S&C and conditioning? And then the last question there is one just to think about: will multi-sport development have a positive impact on reduction of overuse injuries? The jury's not out on this anymore. As you saw in that video, the incidence of things like Tommy John surgery, which is reconstructive elbow surgery, ACLs, obviously of key importance to snow sports. The numbers are on the rise and the ages is getting younger, and there's a direct correlation between overuse. It's not to say it's the only reason, but it certainly is a direct correlation between overuse and an increase in these injuries. So in terms of sports medicine, and again, you'll see John O'Sullivan's name there, he's just done a really good job of pulling a lot of this together into one spot. So I use that as an easy resource for you guys moving out of here. It's a sort of one-stop shop to go to peek at some of this stuff. But you can start to see here, the numbers are pretty staggering. 50% of overuse injuries in young athletes based on single sport. Ohio State looking at physical inactivity in an older age. So, you know, commit to one sport early, might be the first to quit. And from there, there's obviously spin-outs. So you heard the Oregon Ducks coach again in that video talk about, you know, imagine the kid that finds snowboarding a job at 15 years old. Like, how horrible does that sound, right? As someone who loves being on the mountain and luckily enough still loves to be in the mountain at my not so young age, I can't imagine driving any of my athletes to the point where they stop liking snowboarding. I mean, I just can't imagine doing that. A few more studies here looking at 1,200 young athletes as an injury predictor or predictor of potential injury. So if you look at the athletes, of those 1,200 athletes who were in that, those who specialized were 70 to 93% more likely to be injured than children play multiple sports. That's, I mean, when you start to see numbers like that, I'm not sure how you can even have the debate or the discussion anymore. But again, now we're looking at a medical perspective. So we looked at it from a development perspective first, now at the medical perspective. You know, I see things like that, and I shake my head, wondering why we're still doing that. And again, from that video, the soundbite that sticks out at me is that we're not treating them as kids and as people anymore, but we're treating them as capital. So something to think about. Big piece for me, the next one there is the far greater risk of burnout, stress, decreased motivation, lack of enjoyment. If kids are constantly only doing one thing, I think the quote in the video was it stops being a playground and starts becoming a proving ground. We have plenty of time to prove ourselves as athletes. We race all the time. We compete all the time. And that's where, again, this is the sort of the segue into that idea on what kind of play-based activity do we also insert. So beyond the multi-sport, when we do have them in environment, how are we in our environment? What are we doing to insert play in there? And then the last one there, I think, is probably fairly well known within the snow sport community, but particularly in females due to some physiological differences, biomechanical differences. You can look at the anterior knee disorders and eventually higher rates of potential ACL tears in the future with single early sport specialized female athletes as compared to their multi-sport counterparts. This is not to say multisport will make it go away. It's not to say multisport is the magic wand. However, all of the numbers and all of the data that's coming out of this research is very strongly suggesting that, again, because of the increased number of sports skills, sport-specific skills, and more particularly athletic abilities that you develop through a number of sports, whether it's cutting, jumping, bounding, etc., in a team sport, that is definitely transferable to quick, agile feet when you're strapped into a snowboard, things like that. The numbers are pretty clear. So to segue from multisport in terms of what is it and what are the challenges, and to what are the benefits of it from an athletic development perspective, just shared a little bit of the benefits from a medical perspective. As someone who loves sport and feels very lucky every day to wake up and be able to work in sport full time, I pose this question to you, and that's, how important is play? Unstructured play, and I will read this, it's vital to promoting the idea of fun. Fun, if you're not having fun, and I know everyone in this call, I'm preaching, and in this webinar, I'm preaching to the choir, you all really enjoy snowboarding, and hopefully you have a lot of fun every time you get on snow. But again, if we take that fun away, whether you're working with a 6-year-old, a 16-year-old, or a 60-year-old, they're going to find something else to do. And hopefully it's something athletic, but more often than not, it's something non-athletic, and we get into those other health issues. But it promotes teamwork, trust, empathy, culture, and big time, the number one thing, it reduces the burnout levels in athletes, right? If we are allowed and afforded the opportunity to play while we're training, to have fun while we're training, doesn't mean it's all fun and games and lollipops. We need to drill, we need to develop certain skills, get that. But we often are seeing too many examples of programs that are going too far in the opposite direction, to the pendulum swinging way too far into very deliberate, structured training practice sessions, and not allowing for that fun aspect in there. So again, I'll leave that as a rhetorical question, but to think about is, what are the rules in a powder day? What are the rules for you as a coach if you're at a training camp, you've only got 5 days on snow, and you wake up and it puked all night? What are you going to do? And I leave that as a rhetorical question, as food for thought. I'm guessing I know what the answer is for most, and I think that's something to keep true to what you're doing. So incorporating play or aspects or timing to play into your training plan is key. This little infographic talks about kids who are looking at 5 to 17 years old. But you can see the numbers, and again, they're pretty staggering. We've got 31% who have some issues with weight and fitness there. You look at the low number who get really low amounts of active play per week. And then again, you look at free time after school that they're sitting around. I think we're all guilty of it. We have these little devices now that are never far from our reach that we spend a lot of time looking at and wasting time on. But play is key. If the benefits you can see at the bottom, we've discussed them already. These are all the things you absolutely need to be able to be a successful athlete, to be able to be athletic in what you do when you're riding. So I'm going to show a video here, one more video, and then get you to do an activity before we wrap up. And this video is from the Saracens Rugby Club in the United Kingdom, in England. Saracens is one of the top clubs in the English Premiership. They have an academy program stemming all the way down to probably 8, 9, 10 years old is where their academy players start. They absolutely have a multi-sport approach to their training throughout their academy. They're also really big on integrating play into all the aspects of what they do. So I'm going to, hopefully this video will work for you. I'll just adjust the volume. We'll have a peek at what Saracens does. Again, this is the academy players. So you're looking at, in this particular group of players, they're probably between the ages of 14 and 20, give or take. So have a look. This is during training camp, by the way. And again, it's a pretty high club level, so a lot of these kids are traveling in from multiple places, and it's in a shortened time frame of a preseason training camp.
The lads have now been into 4 weeks of pre-season, so this really is a bit of time for us to address the human element of it and a bit of memory making for these academy lads. So, as you know, we've got people all over Essex, Hertfordshire and Kent, and actually we get some great time for rugby, but not always time together just to do something a little bit different and create a few memories, have a bit of fun, whilst getting some good fitness. So this is why we're here at Megadome.
It's not that often that we get everyone together, so as the first thing to do as a culture, it's good to have some good experiences and learn to bond as a team before going into the season. Bigger guys, it's good to see a couple of guys, 110 kilos on the plus on the trampoline. Some of those Lion guys are getting pretty high. Pretty daring bunch, I think.
Recently, for the past few weeks, we drilled really hard. Like a lot of games, a lot of fitness games, getting back into the season, things like this. You just have a night for night just for a few hours of just a massive relief for the boys as well. Like also bonding in pre-season training, learning how we play and stuff like that is massively different to know how we have fun together and things like that in the pre-season time. So just the team chemistry will be a lot better in the season.
Yeah, the team bonding element, that human side of rugby is massive. And for these young lads, the more they get to know each other, the more comfortable they are demanding challenge from each other, demanding each other to work harder in rugby sessions, and it gives us a chance socially to have conversations that are just as important as those relationships. So this is a fantastic way of doing it.
So again, I will just to sort of recap some of that video. Apologies if the accents maybe got in the way of some of the things they were saying, but and of course I still have YouTube on. Sorry about that. So that again, just to recap, Saracens again is one of the top academies. Lots of dollars and cents, lots of sponsorship issues to deal with there. And if you listen to what the words, if you could hear and if you could understand some of the words that both the players and the coaches were saying, is the words that jumped out at me from the coaching staff are things like relationships, trust, fun, development, and of course he said fitness and that kind of stuff. But you heard the first coach or the second coach interviewed said we don't get the guys together very often. So right there you've got an idea of limited time together, limited training, yet they value going out and doing something that, as he said, is still a bit of fitness and it's still, you're learning some kinesthetic awareness, etc. But I think drawing a direct line from the rugby pitch to bouncing on a trampoline is a bit of a tough direct line, other than if you listen to the words: relationships, trust, teamwork, allowing each other to take responsibility and allowing each other to challenge for greater effort, greater participation when they do move into a rugby environment. So again, just a cool idea that you see you can see that it's done in multiple environments, and it's a pretty high performance environment there, and yet they ensure that they do things to put their athletes into environments that challenge them, that get them outside of rugby. And the one word we didn't hear very often from any of the players or coaches was the word rugby. So I am going to open it up to the floor now, and having had a chance to see about, or to get a little bit of information, and again, limited time, but a little bit of information around multisport, what truly is the multisport training principle, what are the impacts it can have on athlete development, what impact can it have on prevention of injury, and what kind of impact can it have when you implement play and fun into your structured training sessions. So again, we're not talking about the 5-year-old, but we're talking about all athletes. Are there best strategies that you can share from the perspective of incorporating these ideas into your own athlete development plans? So is there anybody on the webinar right now that has a unique story or a perspective or a question for the group around things you do within your current program or current coaching? Sharon, it looks like you have a question, but you would need to either unmute or type it into the chat.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. I did type a quick question. I really do believe in multi-sport. Would you suggest, because most of our snowboarding events, yes, we're in a team when we're practicing, but it's more individual, would you suggest more a team sport, maybe during the summer or as a multi-sport?
Good question. I think it's as a general rule, sure. I would strongly always suggest doing a balance or a mix between team and individual. Again, having said that, it really does come down to the individual athlete. So if you have an athlete who um, enjoys the team environment from a snowboarding sense of team environment, but really has zero desire to run around a soccer pitch all summer, I wouldn't necessarily force the issue, but certainly developing team. I mean, I think one of the keys there from that Saracens video was you saw that it. One of the players and one of the coaches said it allows that bonding and that level of comfort and trust where they can then demand more from each other. So that the sort of in training challenging of each other became really healthy and really positive as a result of the relationships and trust that they built. So, I mean, I'm a little biased because I coach both team and individual. So I think a mix of both is really important. Having said that, I do think it comes down to the individual athlete, and I wouldn't want to see somebody standing out forcing them to play ultimate and hurt their fingers if they had absolutely no desire at all to play ultimate, for example, right? So again, yes, I think it's a good idea, but I certainly would balance that off the needs of the athlete. Anybody else have anything they do currently in their program, how they incorporate either play or how they incorporate multi-sport? Do you use multi-sport training for dryland, for example, or is it all very, very sport specific dryland? Does your snowboard team have a pickup basketball game once a week? And is there anything that anyone wants to share that you're currently doing? Or no, we have Cassandra.
Hi, Neil. My internet connection isn't great, so let me know if it's not coming out very well. One of the things that I've found success with is actually multi-discipline competition. So making sure once a season that my freestyle group tries to get out and go have a fun race that they get involved with, and the border cross guys get out and do some kind of fun freestyle rail jam event. And then when we do sort of some critical reflection around it afterwards, they're able to come up with a lot of valuing of the competition and the purpose of competition in sport outside of just where they finish on the podium. And often they do better than they expect to do. But it's a really good way to pull them away from that focus of like, I need to get this to make it to the next spot. I need, to have so many podium finishes to make nationals. It really gives them the opportunity to value competition as something besides just an end goal.
That's super cool. So you're looking at again, one of the questions right up front was not only in a true, sorry, Cassandra just muted you there. You can unmute again. But one of the questions up front was not only how do you look at sport outside of riding, but then again, how do we avoid having riders who specialize, as a racer or a hard booter at 8 years old versus a freestyle rider or a soft boot, etc. And I think that's an example of how you are encouraging athletic riding within your program, right? If anyone who tries to convince me that being, being better at carving and having better edge and pressure control isn't going to help you when you're freestyle riding, and vice versa, being, the agility and the ability to pop and bounce and move that maybe is more associated with freestyle when you're on a race board, you're going to have a tough time selling me on that there's not cross benefit from discipline. And I think the other piece that I really liked from Cassandra was the idea of reflecting on competition and what does competition mean. So you really were able to shift their thinking from outcome goals to process goals, and that was mentioned in the first video as well, right? That we all as coaches and in sport and athletes, we're so focused on that end goal all the time. So how can we come up with creative ways to, we want to compete. It's the reason why we're doing it, right? We wouldn't be in competitive sport if we didn't like to compete. But how do we find ways to do that and change the focus of competition? I think in terms of multi-sport environment, I'll throw out what the Ontario Soccer Association did when they got rid of standings from U12, and parents and those people who don't understand were all up in arms saying, oh, you're removing competition from sport. And that's nonsense. The kids are still competing. They're still trying to score goals. They're still keeping score in their own head and keeping track. The difference there was it allowed them to focus on, touches on the ball, number of successful passes, how many times they beat their opponent, how, so in Cassandra's case, if I'm predominantly a hard boot or a race guy, and I go into like a rail jam or whatever, and I have a clean run or whatever, I'd be pretty amped about that. And, those are things that it's a really cool idea. Thanks for sharing, Cassandra. Do you have anything to follow up there? Okay, anybody else have anything that they want to share or ask before we wrap up? I'm going to give you one NCCP reflection activity to do on your own as you take away. Anybody else have a question there? Okay, it's still looking like Sharon and Cam and Cassandra are coming up with an unanswered question. I'm unable to see.
I think from the question bars here, I think everything's been touched on. Sharon's initial question was about individual versus team sport, and then Cassandra had just chimed in, nope, she doesn't have anything to add, so I think we're all good on the chat bar there.
Awesome, thank you. My question bar has disappeared, so I apologize for that. So just before we wrap, because I don't ever want to keep anybody late from, depending on where you are in the country, whether it's bed or dinner parties, etc., and everything in between. Just would like to sort of challenge you, as I do anytime I have a chance to work with coaches, to use what we use in the NCCP as just a quick reflection tool. So as you have time to process what you see in it, or if you feel like coming back to it, and again, there is a resource page, and this will be shared, so you'll see there's a resource page with some of the references, etc. Easy way to reflect is the idea of a stoplight. So pick one thing maybe you're going to start doing in your coaching this season. Try it out. It's you're not going to know if it works unless you try it. Don't be scared to try it. Don't be scared to do new things. Think of one thing you might stop doing. So as as you've been listening, or as you've watched the videos, or as you've been processing this, are you finding that little person sitting on your shoulder saying, maybe I should stop doing all box jumps for dryland and maybe start to incorporate some more fun and games or whatever? And I'm not picking on anybody, I'm just making things up. But think about that and internalize that, and think about something that maybe you're going to stop doing, if there is anything. And take a minute to validate some of the stuff you're doing in your coaching. So that story that Cassandra shared was a perfect example, right? There's a great example of something that she does within her program every year to encourage the athletes to break away from the mundane routine, to break away from the focus on end goal and on outcome goal, and allow them to still compete, but compete in a fun way, and allow them to, I guess, refocus back onto process goal, which I think is really cool. So think about those things you do within your own coaching and relate it to how you can implement multi-sport training to better develop your athletes and with that key piece of that play piece and a little bit of fun in there as well. So if there are no other questions, I will wrap it up there.